want you to picture a woman standing in the doorway of a restaurant she used to be afraid to eat alone in. She's wearing a black dress she paid for with her own money, from a job she built with her own hands, and she is standing there, waiting for a table, completely at peace with being by herself. That woman is me, and a year before that photo was taken, I didn't recognize my own face in the mirror. I'm going to tell you about the day my ex-boyfriend replaced me with someone else in less than 3 weeks. I'm going to tell you about the group chats that went quiet, the friends who didn't want to choose sides and chose anyway, the version of me that used to shrink in rooms so other people could feel bigger. But mostly, I'm going to tell you about the year after that, the year nobody filmed, the year with no soundtrack, no highlight reel, just me, a notebook, and a decision I made alone in a parked car at 11 at night. I didn't scream. I didn't fight back. I didn't post a single cryptic quote about loyalty or karma. I just went quiet, and I became someone they never expected. And when I finally saw them again, when I finally stood in front of the people who thought they'd watched me lose, I watched their faces change in real time. Not because I said anything cruel, because I didn't have to. This is the story of how I stopped trying to win back a life that was never mine to begin with, and built one that actually was. Before I go further, I need you to understand something, because it changes everything about how you'll hear this story. This isn't a revenge story. Not really. Revenge needs an audience. Revenge needs the other person to know they lost. What I'm about to tell you isn't that. This is about becoming, about the specific, unglamorous, invisible work of turning yourself into someone you respect, whether or not anyone else ever notices. Some of you are in your own lowest point right now, tonight, watching this video instead of sleeping because your mind won't stop replaying something someone said to you. I see you. I was you. Stay until the end, because I'm going to tell you exactly what I did in order with the timeline, the setbacks, and the moments I almost quit.
If stories like this, quiet transformation, not petty payback, are the kind of thing that helps you get through your own hard season, hit subscribe now, because this channel exists for exactly this, for the version of you that's building something nobody can see yet. Okay, let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to who I was before any of this happened. I need to tell you who I was because the before version of this story is the part people skip, and it's the most important part. I was 29 years old, and I had spent almost my entire adult life being what other people needed me to be. In my relationship, I was the understanding one, the one who didn't make a big deal out of things, the one who laughed off the comments about my weight, my job, my lack of ambition, because making a big deal out of it felt like more work than just absorbing it. In my friend group, I was the reliable one, the one who remembered birthdays and drove people to the airport and never asked for the same energy back, because somewhere along the way, I'd decided that being needed was close enough to being loved. At work, I was invisible in the specific way that quiet, competent people become invisible. I did good work, I got decent reviews, I got passed over for promotions 3 times in 4 years, and each time I told myself it wasn't my time yet, instead of asking why it was never my time. I want to be honest with you about something. I don't think I was unhappy exactly. I think I was numb. There's a difference. Unhappy people know something is wrong. I had gotten so good at shrinking myself that I didn't even register the shrinking anymore. It just felt like Tuesday. I had been with my boyfriend, I'll call him Daniel, for 4 years. We met in our mid-20s at a point in both our lives where we were figuring out who we were, and somewhere in those 4 years, I stopped figuring out who I was and started figuring out who he needed me to be instead. He wasn't a cartoon villain. I want to be clear about that, because I think a lot of these stories make the other person into a monster so the narrator looks better by comparison, and that's not honest, and it's not useful to you either. Daniel wasn't cruel in dramatic ways. He was cruel in small ways, consistently for years, in a way that's much harder to point to and much easier to explain away. He'd comment on what I ordered at restaurants, not cruelly, just a raised eyebrow, "You sure?" that made me second-guess a plate of pasta. He'd introduce me at parties as my girlfriend, she's in accounting, never anything else about me, like the job was the only
interesting fact he could locate. He'd make plans without me and act surprised when I mentioned it hurt. And I let it happen because the alternative, being alone, being someone who couldn't make it work, felt worse than being quietly diminished. The catalyst wasn't one single moment. I wish I could tell you there was a cinematic betrayal, a single scene that justified everything that came after. The truth is messier than that, and I think that's actually more common than people admit. It started small. Daniel had a coworker named Priya, I'll use a different name for her too, who he mentioned more and more over about 6 months. Nothing overt. Priya thinks I should ask for a raise. Priya said this podcast is good. Priya's really easy to talk to. I want you to notice something about that pattern, because I didn't notice it in real time, and maybe you're not noticing it in your own life right now either. It's never the big things that tell you a relationship is ending. It's the accumulation of small comparisons. It's someone starting to measure you against another person without ever telling you the test has started. By the time I found out anything had actually happened between us, we had already broken up. Or rather, he had already broken up with me, on a Tuesday evening over a conversation that lasted maybe 11 minutes, where he told me he needed space to figure out what he wanted. 11 minutes, 4 years, and the ending got 11 minutes. 19 days later, she posted a photo of the two of them at the same restaurant where he'd taken me for our 1-year anniversary. 19 days. I remember doing the math obsessively, like the number itself was supposed to tell me something. Was it happening before we ended? Did the 11 minutes even matter, or was I already replaced before the conversation started? I never got a clean answer to that, and I've made peace with the fact that I probably never will. Here's the part I haven't told many people. About 2 weeks after the breakup, before I knew about Priya, I ran into a mutual friend, someone from our old friend group, at a coffee shop. She meant well, I think. People often mean well right before they say the thing that guts you. She said, "Honestly, I'm not that surprised. You guys always seemed a little mismatched, like he was going somewhere and you were kind of just there."
kind of just there. I want you to sit with how that feels, because I think a lot of you have heard some version of that sentence from someone in your life. Not, "You're a bad person," something worse, something quieter. A confirmation that you had been furniture in your own life, that the people around you had privately clocked your invisibility long before you did. I said something polite. I don't even remember what. I remember walking to my car, sitting down, and not turning the key for almost 20 minutes. That should have been the moment I broke completely. In a lot of ways, it was the bottom. But I want to tell you something important. Hitting bottom doesn't feel like a dramatic collapse in a thunderstorm. For me, it felt like sitting very still in a parking lot on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, in ordinary weather, feeling like the most ordinary, forgettable version of a person that had ever existed. And that's when everything started to change. Not because I had an epiphany, not because a stranger said something wise to me in that coffee shop. It changed because I asked myself one question sitting in that car, and the question was this: was she wrong? Not was she cruel to say it, was she wrong? And the honest answer, the answer that took me another hour of sitting in that parking lot to actually admit, was no, she wasn't wrong. I had been kind of just there. Not because I lacked worth, but because I had spent years handing my worth over to other people to hold on to for me. And somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten I was allowed to keep it myself. That was the first time in years I had been honest with myself instead of comfortable. I'm not going to pretend the next few weeks were some cinematic montage of self-discovery. They were ugly. I cried in the shower so my roommate wouldn't hear. I looked at Priya's Instagram more times than I'll ever admit publicly.
I sent Daniel a 3-paragraph text at 1 a.m. that I deleted before sending, then wrote another one and deleted that too. I want to normalize that for you, because these videos sometimes skip the part where the person is still a mess for a while. You're allowed to be a mess for a while. The turning point isn't the moment the mess ends. It's the moment you start building something next to the mess, even while it's still there. What I did, about 3 weeks after that conversation in the coffee shop, was buy a plain notebook from a drugstore. Nothing symbolic about it. It was on sale. And I wrote one sentence at the top of the first page. I don't know who I am yet, but I'm going to find out. On purpose, this time. I didn't know it yet, but that sentence was the actual end of my old life. Not the breakup, not the coffee shop. That sentence, in a cheap notebook, on an unremarkable evening nobody else witnessed. I think it's worth pausing here to talk honestly about the limitations other people had put on me, because you can't dismantle a cage you can't see. My mother, lovingly, had always told me I was the sensible one in the family. Code, I eventually realized, for the one who doesn't ask for much. My old boss once told me in a review that I was dependable, if not a standout, a sentence that took me 2 years to be angry about. Daniel had once said, half joking, that I was low maintenance, and I had taken it as a compliment for years before I understood it meant he had never had to make room for me. None of these people were villains. That's what makes this so insidious. They were just repeating back to me a story I had already agreed to star in. The reliable, sensible, low-maintenance woman who didn't take up much space and didn't expect much either. I realized in that first week of journaling that I had never once asked myself what I actually wanted, not for a partner, not for a career, not for a Tuesday night. I had only ever asked what was reasonable to want given who I apparently was. So I started asking the other question instead. By the end of that first month, I hadn't done anything dramatic. No new haircut, no gym membership, no grand declaration. What I had was a notebook with about 40 pages of handwriting in it, most of it messy, some of it contradictory, all of it honest. And one afternoon, rereading it, I found this line I'd written on a bad night. I keep waiting for someone to notice I deserve more. What if I just decided that myself and stopped waiting? I closed the notebook. I sat there for a long time, and for the first time since the breakup, since the coffee shop, since the 19 days, I didn't feel like a woman who had been left behind. I felt like a woman standing at the start of something. I want to be very precise about something, because I think it's the single most important distinction in this entire story. The moment I decided to change was not the moment I decided to prove Daniel wrong, or Priya wrong, or that friend from the coffee shop wrong. If I had built the next year of my life around them, it would have collapsed the second they stopped watching. Revenge has a shelf life because it depends on an audience that eventually gets bored and looks away. What I built instead had to survive on its own, with no audience at all, for most of a year. The actual decision looked almost embarrassingly small. I sat down with my notebook and wrote 3 questions. What have I always wanted to try but told myself I didn't have time for? What do I actually believe about my own body, my own mind, my own future, not what I've absorbed from other people? If no one ever found out about any of this, would I still want to do it? That third question became my filter for the entire year. If the answer was no, if I only wanted to do something because I imagined someone's face when they saw it, I crossed it off the list. It sounds small, but it eliminated almost everything petty from what I was about to build, and it's the reason this ended up being a story about becoming instead of a story about getting even. The gap period, the year with no name, the year nobody was filming, started with the least glamorous thing imaginable. I fixed my sleep schedule. I know, not exactly cinematic, But I had spent years staying up late scrolling, waking up exhausted, dragging myself through days on caffeine and low-grade dread. I started going to bed at 10:30. I started waking up at 6 a.m., not to grind, but just to have quiet time before the world made demands on me. Within 3 weeks, something shifted that I didn't expect. I had more patience, not more energy exactly, more patience. For myself, mostly. The self-hatred spirals that used to eat 2 hours of my evening started shrinking to 20 minutes, then 10. From there, I made a list, a real list, in the notebook, of things I wanted to build over the next year. I'm going to read you the actual list because I think specificity matters more than vague inspiration. Rebuild my body, not to look a certain way for anyone else, but because I wanted to feel strong enough to carry my own groceries up 4 flights of stairs without stopping to catch my breath. Learn to actually manage money instead of vaguely feeling anxious about it. I had $11,000 in high-interest debt and a savings account with $240 in it. Finished the certification I'd started and abandoned twice, a project management credential that could actually move my career instead of leaving me stuck in the same entry-level lane for another 4 years. Make at least one new friend who had never met Daniel, so I had at least one relationship untouched by the old life. Learn to be alone in public, restaurants, movies, museums, without feeling like I was wearing a sign that said no one wants to be with her. Here's where I want to get specific, because vague inspiration doesn't help anyone, and I promised you numbers and timelines. Month 1. I started walking. Not running, walking. 30 minutes a day because that's what my body could actually do without quitting from misery within a week. I also opened a separate savings account and automated $40 a week into it. $40 felt like nothing. It also felt like something, because it was mine, and I had chosen it. Month 2, I signed up for the project management certification course again, the one I'd abandoned twice before. This time, I told exactly one person about it, a woman named Renata from my apartment building who I'd exchanged maybe 10 sentences with over 2 years. I asked if she wanted to be accountability texts for our separate goals. She said yes. That relationship became one of the most important of my entire year, and it started with 10 sentences and one honest ask. Month 3, I hit my first real wall. I missed 2 weeks of the course because of a work crunch, gained back some of the walking habit's momentum loss, and spiraled one night into checking Priya's Instagram for 45 minutes straight. I want to tell you about that night specifically because I think the setback matters as much as the progress. I sat on my bathroom floor that night, not dramatically, just because it was cool tile and I didn't want to be in my bed, and I asked myself, am I going to let one bad night undo 3 months? I decided no, not with some grand speech to myself. I just deleted the app again and went back to bed and got up the next morning and walked my 30 minutes anyway, tired and puffy-eyed and unmotivated. That walk, the one I did not want to take, mattered more than any of the walks I took when I felt good. I want to talk about the people who held me up during this year, because no transformation happens in true isolation, and I think it's dishonest when these stories pretend otherwise. Renata became my closest friend that year, and it started because I was willing to be a little bit vulnerable with a near stranger instead of waiting for an old friend to show up in the way I needed. She never met Daniel. She never knew the old, invisible version of me. To her, I was just a woman rebuilding her finances and finishing a certification, and there was something quietly powerful about being known only as the person currently in progress. I also, for the first time in my life, went to therapy. Not because I was in crisis exactly, but because I recognized I didn't actually know how to ask for what I wanted, in anything, relationships, jobs, friendships, and I wanted to understand where that came from before I built a whole new life on the same broken foundation. My therapist, a very direct woman named Dr. Osei, said something in our 3rd session I wrote down word for word.
You keep describing yourself as someone who doesn't ask for much. I'd like you to notice that's not a personality trait. That's a habit, and habits can change. That sentence lived in my head for the rest of the year. I don't want to pretend I processed the hurt from Daniel and Priya in some clean, linear way. Grief and humiliation don't work like that. Around month 5, I finally let myself write a letter to Daniel that I never sent. I wrote about the 4 years, the small comments, the 11-minute ending, the 19 days. I wrote until my hand cramped. And then I did something that felt strange at the time, but that Dr. Osei suggested. I read it out loud, alone in my apartment, to no one. Hearing my own voice say those words out loud, instead of just replaying them silently in my head at 2 a.m., did something I can't fully explain. It moved the pain from something living inside my chest to something that had happened, past tense, to a person I used to be. I didn't forgive them that day. I want to be honest about that too. Forgiveness wasn't a single event for me. It was more like the volume slowly turning down over months until one day I noticed I hadn't thought about either of them in almost 2 weeks. And it didn't feel like I was avoiding it. It felt like it had just genuinely stopped being the loudest thing in my life. By month 6, I passed the project management certification. On the second attempt at the exam, because I want you to know it wasn't effortless. I failed it the first time by 4 points. I sat in my car after seeing that score and cried hard for about 10 minutes. Then I rescheduled the retake for 6 weeks later and studied harder than I had studied for anything in years. I passed on the second attempt with a score comfortably above the requirement.
The $40 a week had become, by month 7, just over $1,800 in savings, and I had paid off almost half of the $11,000 in debt by aggressively redirecting a work bonus I would have previously spent on treating myself out of guilt. The 30-minute walks had become 45-minute walks, 3 of which had turned into actual runs by month 8, and I could, for the first time in years, walk up 4 flights of stairs without stopping. None of these numbers are extraordinary. I'm not telling you this to impress you. I'm telling you because I want you to see that transformation in real life looks like a stack of unremarkable Tuesdays, not a movie montage. And that's when everything started to change, not with a single dramatic moment, but with the quiet accumulation of 100 small decisions nobody else witnessed. By the end of month 8, I looked at the woman in my notebook from month 1 and barely recognized her handwriting, let alone her fears. I wasn't done, not even close, but for the first time I understood something Dr. Osei had told me back in month 3 that I hadn't been ready to hear yet. You're not becoming a new person. You're finally becoming the person you already were, underneath all that shrinking. By month 9, the changes that showed on the outside were real, but they were never the point, and I want to say that clearly before I describe them because I think this niche sometimes gets that backwards. I had lost some weight from the running, not a number I'm going to center because it was never the goal, just a side effect of finally moving my body out of love instead of punishment. I stood differently. I noticed it first in a photo a coworker took at an event. Shoulders back, chin level, not the slightly folded-in posture I've carried for years without realizing it. I had also, around month 7, started dressing for myself instead of for invisibility. Not expensive clothes, just clothes I actually liked, in colors I'd avoided for years because Daniel had once said bright colors were a lot. I wore a red coat that winter I'd wanted for 2 years and never bought. But the invisible changes were the ones that actually mattered. I stopped apologizing before I spoke.
I know that sounds small, it wasn't small. I used to preface almost every opinion with, "This might be a dumb question, but," or "Sorry, I just think," and around month 6, in a work meeting, I caught myself starting to say it, and I stopped and I just said the thing, no apology attached to my own thoughts. I stopped checking my phone for validation after I did something well. I used to need someone, anyone, to witness my wins before they felt real. Somewhere around month 8, I
Finished a project at work that I was genuinely proud of, and I didn't tell anyone for 2 full days, just to see if I could let the pride exist without an audience. It did. It existed just fine, without anyone clapping. And I stopped auditioning for rooms that didn't want me. I turned down a friend's invitation to a party I knew would include people from my old friend group, not out of fear, but because I genuinely didn't want to go. And for the first time, "I don't want to" felt like a complete sentence. The first external sign that something had shifted came at work around month 9. My manager, the same one who'd passed me over 3 times, pulled me aside after a project I'd led came in ahead of schedule and under budget, and said, almost surprised, "I don't know what's different about you this year, but keep doing it." I didn't say anything clever back. I just said thank you and went back to my desk and let myself feel proud for exactly as long as I wanted to feel proud, instead of immediately deflecting it the way I used to. 2 months later, I was promoted into a role I'd been quietly passed over for 3 separate times in 4 years. The promotion came with a title that actually described what I did, a 14% raise, and, this mattered more than either of those things, a seat at a table where decisions actually got made, instead of just handed to me after the fact. And that's when everything started to change again, in a second wave. Because once one door opened, I noticed I had the confidence to knock on others I would have previously assumed were locked. Around month 10, Renata convinced me to join a Saturday morning running group in our neighborhood. Nothing serious, just a loose group of people who met at a park at 7 a.m. I almost didn't go. The version of me a year earlier absolutely would not have gone, because showing up somewhere new, alone, uninvited by anyone I already knew, used to feel like walking into a room with a target on my back. I went anyway. I made 3 new friends in that group over the following months, people who, like Renata, had never met Daniel, never heard the coffee shop comment, never known me as anyone other than the woman who showed up early and ran the whole loop without complaining. By month 11, I had finished paying off the debt completely, all $11,000. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, refreshing the account balance until it showed 0, and feeling something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, exactly, more like relief, the specific relief of watching a weight you'd carried so long you forgot it was optional, finally set down. Word travels, even when you're not trying to make it travel. I hadn't posted about the promotion. I hadn't posted about the debt payoff or the running group or the red coat. But small towns of friend groups still talk. And eventually, through the grapevine, I heard that people from my old circle, the ones who'd gone quiet after the breakup, the ones who didn't want to choose sides, had started asking Renata's now mutual friends what I'd done that year. I want to be honest about how that felt. It felt good. I'm not going to pretend it didn't, but it felt good in a smaller, quieter way than I expected, more like a private smile than a victory lap. Because by that point, month 11, I genuinely wasn't doing any of it for them anymore. Their noticing was a nice bonus on top of a life I'd already decided I liked, not the reason I'd built it. That distinction, bonus versus reason, is, I think, the entire difference between healing and revenge. By month 12, something had settled in me that I want to try to describe carefully, because I think it's the actual destination of this whole story, more than any external achievement. I stopped narrating my life to an imaginary audience of my critics. For most of my 20s, some part of my brain had been constantly performing for an invisible jury. Daniel, my old boss, that friend from the coffee shop, my mother's soft comments about being the sensible one. Every decision ran through a filter of, what would they think?
Somewhere in that final month, I noticed the filter was just gone. I ordered what I wanted at restaurants without the raised eyebrow in my head. I took the promotion without wondering if it made me look like I was trying too hard. I wore the red coat without bracing for a comment that was never going to come, because the person who used to make those comments simply wasn't in the room anymore, physically or mentally. I want to read you the last entry I wrote in that first notebook on almost exactly the 1-year anniversary of the day I bought it. I used to think I needed someone to notice I'd changed for it to be real. Tonight, I realized I haven't thought about being noticed in weeks. I think that means it's real. That was the moment the transformation stopped being a project and started just being who I was. About 13 months after the breakup, just past that 1-year mark, a mutual friend was getting married. Not a close friend, but close enough that both Daniel and I were invited, and close enough that I couldn't quietly skip it without it being noticed. I almost didn't go. The old version of me would have found any excuse, but I sat with the discomfort for a few days, asked myself the same question I'd been asking all year. Would I
still want to do this if no one from my old life ever found out, and realized that yes, I genuinely wanted to be there for this friend, regardless of who else showed up. So I went, in the red coat because it was cold and because I liked it. I saw them before they saw me, Daniel by the bar and Priya beside him, and I want to tell you honestly what I felt in that first 3 seconds. My stomach dropped. Exactly like it would have a year earlier. The old wiring doesn't disappear completely. What was different was what happened in the next 3 seconds after that. I didn't freeze. I didn't turn around and hide in the bathroom, which is genuinely what I would have done a year before. I finished my sentence with the person I was talking to, laughed at something that was actually funny, and then, when there was a natural lull, I walked over and said hello, calm, warm, unbothered, because I actually was unbothered, not performing it. I watched Daniel's face do something I hadn't expected to witness, a kind of double take, like he was recalculating something in real time. He said, "Wow, you look really good, really different." I said, "Thank you, I feel really good," and I meant it as a simple fact, not a jab. What happened over the next 20 minutes was the part I want to slow down on, because it's the part that surprised me most. Priya, who I'd never actually spoken to directly, found a reason to strike up conversation, asked about my job, seemed to already know about the promotion, which told me the grapevine had reached further than I'd realized. There was something in her tone I recognized instantly, because I used to do it myself. The slightly too eager questions of someone trying to figure out if they should feel threatened. Daniel, at one point, when Priya stepped away, said quietly, "I heard you got promoted, and the running thing. You seem really happy." There was a pause where I think he wanted me to ask how things were going with him and Priya, an opening, a door back into my old role of managing his feelings for him. I didn't take it. "I am happy. I hope you are too." And I meant that too. Genuinely. That's the part that shocked me most in the moment. I actually meant it.
Later that night, near the end of the reception, Daniel found me again, this time without Priya nearby, and said something I'd half expected but still wasn't fully ready for. "I've thought about us a lot this year, actually. I don't know, maybe I moved too fast with everything. I want to be honest with you about the half-second where the old version of me flickered back to life, the part of me that a year ago would have felt a surge of validation so intense it might have overridden every ounce of judgment I'd built, that old ache for someone, anyone, to confirm I'd been worth staying for. But it was just a flicker, because the new version of me, the one built on 100 unremarkable Tuesdays, $40 a week, failed exams, retaken, 6 a.m. runs in the cold, didn't need that confirmation anymore. I already knew I was worth staying for. I'd spent a year proving it to the only audience that actually mattered. I think you made the choice that was right for you at the time, and I made a choice that turned out to be really right for me. I don't think either of us needs to revisit it. I want to be precise about what I felt walking to my car that night, because I think the honest answer surprises people expecting a triumphant ending. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm, genuinely, deeply calm in a way I hadn't felt in years. There was no scene, no dramatic exit line, no group of onlookers whispering about how far I'd come. Just me, in a red coat, in a parking lot, unlocking my car door with a steady hand, thinking about nothing more dramatic than what I wanted for breakfast the next morning before my run. That's when the last piece of the puzzle clicked into place for me, the realization I'd been waiting a year, without knowing it, to arrive at. This was never about them. It never really was, even in the beginning, even when it felt like it was. The catalyst was Daniel and Priya and that comment in the coffee shop, yes, but the actual work, the actual year, was never in service of proving anything to them. It was in service of a woman sitting in a parked car asking herself if a stranger's clear but honest observation was true and deciding to do something about it and knowing that herself. Daniel's regret and pain didn't feel like a cause. It felt like confirmation of something I already knew and didn't need externally validated anymore, that I had become someone worth regretting losing. But I didn't need him to say it. I would have kept running those 6 a.m. loops in the cold whether he ever showed up at that wedding or not.
That's the part I most want you to take from this story. The version of you that you're building right now, in your own quiet, unfilmed year, it has to be worth building, even if no one ever finds out, especially if no one ever finds out. I've heard it said that the best revenge is living well. I used to think that was a cute saying for a throw pillow. Now I think it's only true with an asterisk attached, and the asterisk is this: it only works if you're doing it for yourself, and not as a performance for the people who hurt you. If you're building a life around what someone else will think when they see it, you've just built a more elaborate cage with a nicer view. The only version of living well that actually heals you is the one that would still feel worth it in a locked room with the curtains closed and no one ever finding out. If you're in your own lowest point right now, your own 11-minute ending, your own coffee shop comment that won't stop replaying, here's what I'd actually tell you to do, concretely, starting tonight. Buy the cheap notebook. Write one honest sentence about who you actually are underneath what's been done to you. Pick one small, boring habit you can start tomorrow. Not a total life overhaul, just one walk, one budget line, 1 hour of sleep reclaimed, and do it even on the day you don't want to. Find one person who has never met the people who hurt you and let them know you only as the person you're building right now. And ask yourself before every decision for the next year, would I still do this if no one ever found out? If the answer is yes, you're building something real. I didn't scream. I didn't fight back. I just became someone they never expected. And somewhere in that year of nobody watching, I stopped needing them to. So tell me, what's your glow-up story? What's the quiet, unfilmed year you're in the middle of right now, or the one you already lived through? Tell me in the comments below. I read every single one, and I promise you, someone else scrolling through them tonight needs to hear that they're not the only one sitting in that parked car. If this helped you, subscribe, share it with someone who needs it, and I'll see you in the next one.